Tia raised her voice and said,
"This is not because he gave Wanda something to eat. It was clearly Wanda who recovered by herself. In the end, Wanda's recovery was down to her own good health and had nothing to do with that good-for-nothing."
Wanda asked doubtfully,
"Tia, what did your son-in-law give me to eat just now?" "Hey, who knows? It was just a lump of black stuff,"
Tia said. Wanda was shocked when she heard that. She turned to Mark and asked,
"Black stuff? What is that?"
Mark said, "Energy return infusion, a little something I brewed myself." Wanda originally thought that she hadn't heard right, but after hearing the name of the black stuff, her eyes immediately widened.
"Energy return infusion? Is it the kind of energy return infusion that can make interrupted energy flow smoothly again, and even strengthen weak energy? Ah, young man, so you're the expert that was destined to be in my life."
Wanda was excited and grabbed Mark's arm. Everyone was stunned. Tia said,
"Wanda, what's wrong with you? How could this useless person be an expert at anything? What energy return infusion? What he gave you was just a lump of black stuff. I don't know where he got it from."
Wanda said,
"There's something you guys don't know. I was born with asthma, and then I got a heart condition. These two diseases could easily cause me to die suddenly. After many years of treatment, there was no obvious improvement. I could only take it easy and hope I wouldn't die. About 10 years ago, I had an illness when I was in my 40s. At that time, I almost died. Luckily, I met a medical specialist who gave me some energy return infusion. He pulled me back from the brink of death. At that time, I had to pay a lot of money for his energy return infusion. That specialist was also a bit of a psychic. He told me this medicine could save my life, but I was destined to only have 2 doses of it during my lifetime. One was the dose he gave me, and the other apparently is the dose your son-in-law just gave me."
Wanda became even more excited when she said this. She grabbed Mark's arm tightly.
"So, you're the expert that the psychic medical specialist talked about back then. Young man, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for saving my life."
Mark also didn't expect that such a thing had actually happened to Wanda. The medical specialist back then must have been an extraordinary individual. He'd known that sometime in the future, someone would once again give Wanda Wyatt the energy return infusion to save her life. Wanda was filled with emotion as she said to Tia,
Tia, you keep saying that your son-in-law is a useless person, but I disagree. How is he a useless person? He is clearly an expert."
Tia was also stunned. She thought to herself,
"This can't be. What kind of life-saving medicine did this useless son-in-law of mine give Wanda just now? How is this possible? How could he have this kind of life-saving medicine?"
Wanda was so excited that she continued to thank Mark.
"Young man, you have saved my life. Please accept my eternal gratitude. You're my savior."
Mark quickly hugged Wanda. "There's no need to thank me, Miss Wyatt. I didn't save you through any great skill. It was just a coincidence." Wanda said,
"Young man, do you still have that life-saving energy return infusion in your hand? Back when I wanted to buy a few more pills from that specialist, he disappeared in the blink of an eye, and I couldn't get any more. But now that I've met you, no matter what, you have to sell me a few more life-saving doses. I'll pay whatever you ask."
Mark said, "Miss Wyatt, I don't have much left, and I'm not sure I should not sell it to you anyway. Didn't that specialist say you were destined to only have 2 doses of energy return infusion? It wouldn't be wise to go against the recommendations of such an expert." Wanda was stunned. After a moment, she shook her head and said with a sigh,
"I guess you're right. It will not do me any good to take more. Young man, I don't want the energy return infusion anymore, but can I ask you something?"
Mark nodded. What is it?
Since you have the energy return infusion which can save a life in an instant, it means that you're an expert. Can you save my husband? He was injured when he was young, and the bones in his spine were damaged. He retired from his job a long time ago, and now he just hangs around at home. But the pain in his back is still there. In fact, it's become worse as he's got older. It's torture for him every day. Please, can you save him?
Wanda begged. Mark shook his head and said, I'm sorry, Miss Wyatt. I'm not a doctor who specializes in treating people. I'm afraid I can't cure your husband. The reason why Mark rejected her immediately was because he was still a little angry. Just now, when his mother-in-law scolded him, Wanda had added fuel to the fire and tried to persuade her friend to kick him out and find a rich husband for her daughter. Miss Wyatt, if I remember correctly, just now, you urged my mother-in-law to get my wife to divorce me and then kick me out of the house. You opened your mouth and tried to destroy someone's marriage. That's just wrong. I may be a wimp in your eyes, but I still have some backbone in me. What you said in front of me before, it's very difficult for me to not mind it, Mark said. Wanda Wyatt felt ashamed when she heard this, because what Mark said was right. It wasn't only Wanda who felt ashamed either. Layla and Sarah felt the same way. Only Tia didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. Instead, she pointed arrogantly at Mark and said, You're a useless person, and you still hold a grudge against me? My friend asked you to treat her husband and you refused. Who do you think you are? Mark gave Tia a cold look and then said, In your eyes, I am a wimp. Do I deserve to be mocked by you? No. But you're my mother-in-law and my senior, so I'm stuck. No matter how much you mock me, there's nothing I can do about it. Even when I'd like to retaliate and tell you exactly what I think of you, I have to pretend that nothing happened and serve you without hesitation. And then you expect me to do you favors? Mark shook his head. I'm sorry you feel the way you do, but I'm not that despicable. I've already done my utmost to save Miss Wyatt just now, and succeeded. I've no obligation to save her family. After saying that, Mark turned around and entered his bedroom, closing the door with a bang. This made Tia so angry that she stomped her foot and pointed at the bedroom door. She scolded loudly. Hey, you wimp! You think you're all that, don't you? Can't you even say a few nice words to me? Who do you think you are? Wanda suddenly stood up and said to Tia, Tia, that's enough. What your son-in-law said is right. We really went too far just now. Even if he really is a useless person, how can we say that about him? Besides, your son-in-law is not a loser at all. He's clearly an expert. Tia, it seems that you have eyes but you can't see. You insist on treating an expert like a useless person, causing us to also think that he's a useless person. You spoke rudely to him, causing him to be unwilling to save my husband. Wanda sighed heavily. I'm very grateful that he was able to save me regardless of past grievances. He's right. He's not obligated to save my husband, and I have too much pride to beg him. Wanda sighed again. Timothy, who was standing at the side, witnessed the whole incident. He couldn't help but mutter to himself. When Mark gave me that energy return infusion, I didn't take it seriously. But less than half an hour after eating it, I felt refreshed and full of energy. Now I saw Wanda take the energy return infusion, and she got her life back. It seems that the energy return infusion that Mark brewed really works. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's wonderful. After breakfast the next morning, Mark prepared to take Nicole to work. He drove out the Ferrari 488 gifted to him by the Super American Bank. This car was indeed dazzling, especially under the sunlight. Its strong red color made people love it. Even Nicole couldn't help but love it too.
A luxury car is a luxury car. Mark, are you going to drive me to the office today? Isn't it too conspicuous?
Nicole had always liked to keep a low profile and didn't like to be flamboyant. Even as the boss of a company, she felt that driving such a flashy and expensive sports car was over the top. Mark said, "This car's not been driven once since it was sent here. Today I'll take you to the company and treat it as a test drive." The two of them got in the car together. But just as the car was starting, Mark suddenly felt dizzy. A memory rushed into his head for no reason. A memory from 5 years earlier. 5 years ago, he was also part of a wealthy family. The Johnson family was one of the top families in LA County and was deeply rooted. As the son of a wealthy family, it was inevitable for him to be a bit of a playboy. For example, he often did things like racing cars in the middle of the night. On a certain night 5 years ago, he was driving a Ferrari sports car and racing with several other wealthy young men on the endless highway. But he only remembered that he was once the son of a wealthy family and had raced, not any details. The Johnson family was one of the top families in LA County. As for how their big family was destroyed overnight and what exactly happened, he couldn't remember it at all. Every time he tried to think of this problem, his brain would feel an intense pain. So even though he really wanted to know the truth of the past, he didn't dare to think about it because he couldn't bear the pain in his head. But when he sat in the Ferrari today, the memory of a race car 5 years ago swept over him. He had smashed the accelerator to the floor and driven the Ferrari at top speed. But just as he passed the other sports cars and was about to win the race, a blurry shadow appeared in front of him. This caught him off guard. He instinctively wanted to step on the brakes, but his car was going too fast. The black shadow suddenly enlarged several times in an instant, blocking his way like a ferocious monster. Mark's pupils instantly enlarged. In the next second, with a bang, the Ferrari he was driving crashed into the black shadow. He felt a roaring in his head. His body flipped over along with the car, and then he was thrown into the air. And then he fell heavily. Then he didn't know anything. Until this moment, he didn't know what the black shadow that suddenly appeared in front of him was. This memory suddenly surged into his mind, making him feel very uncomfortable. It even made him feel dizzy and short of breath. He broke out in a cold sweat. What exactly happened on that day 5 years ago? Was there an accident? He couldn't help but think about it, but at that moment, that intense pain swept over him again. He almost couldn't bear it, so he'd no choice but to step on the brakes. Then he dropped his head on the steering wheel and panted heavily. Nicole, who was sitting in the front passenger seat beside him, was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Mark, what's wrong?" Nicole had never seen Mark like this before. Mark slowly adjusted his breathing until he finally calmed down. "I'm fine. I just remembered some things from the past," he said lightly, not wanting his wife to worry. Then he pretended to be calm and set the car in motion again. Soon, they arrived at Nicole's company building. "Mark, are you not feeling well? If you're not feeling well, go back and rest." Nicole got out of the car and looked at him worriedly. Mark shook his head. "I'm really fine. Nicole, you work hard. I'll come to pick you up after work tonight." After Nicole walked into the company building, Mark turned the car around and quickly returned home to park the Ferrari. He looked at the dazzling luxury car and suddenly had a thought that he didn't want to drive this car anymore. After that, Mark went to the park and Riverside. He continued to absorb some natural spirit energy as usual. Although the effect was not obvious to anyone else, he knew his breathing was better and he was getting stronger. In the blink of an eye, it was already past 8 o'clock in the evening after dinner. Mark went to pick up Nicole from work. This time, he didn't drive the Ferrari, but drove Nicole's Buick. He went to the company building and called Nicole. He found that she was still working overtime. Mark waited in the car for more than an hour. When it was almost 10 o'clock in the evening, Nicole dragged her tired body out of the company building. "Nicole, you must be so tired. You have been working overtime every day lately. You have to take better care of your health," Mark said as he started the car. Nicole yawned and said, "I've got no choice. After signing the contract with Cooley Cosmetics, everyone in our company is working overtime. After all, it is a big company, and this is our first time working with them. We can't drag them down. Our cooperation with Cooley Cosmetics is very smooth. That morning, Anna and I brought the proposal that we rushed out from work to their company. We were going to talk to their boss in person. I didn't expect that we wouldn't even see the boss of their company. We only saw the vice president, but the vice CEO signed the contract with us without pitching anything." Nicole shook her head with a puzzled frown. "I still don't understand why Cooley Cosmetics signed with us so smoothly and actively. The president didn't even show up. He just sent a vice president to sign the contract with us. He really trusts us, I guess." "Is that so? Nicole, that seems a little strange. Cooley Cosmetics is a big brand in this country. You didn't know each other before they contacted you, and they chose to work with your company without looking at your proposal, hearing your pitch, or even meeting with you? It's really surprising. Nicole, do you know the CEO of Cooley Cosmetics?" Mark said. "How is that possible? How would the boss of a small company like ours know the boss of a big company? Anyway, we're quite lucky this time. Cooley Cosmetics trusts us so much. We must do our best. We can't let them down." Nicole talked casually about her company with Mark. At this moment, when Mark passed a turnoff, Nicole suddenly said, "Stop." Mark hurriedly stepped on the brakes, and the car stopped. "What's wrong?" Mark asked. Nicole raised her hand and pointed to the front of the car. "Look ahead. That seems to be my sister's car." Mark followed her finger, and indeed saw a Maybach parked not far away from the road. Two young women wearing sexy clothes and makeup stood by the car. There was also a young man in a white suit. The three of them chatted and laughed by the car. It was an odd sight in the middle of the night. And wasn't the young woman wearing black suspenders and a short skirt his sister-in-law, Kelly? It's already so late. Why is Kelly here? Mark also felt puzzled. His sister-in-law was currently in university. Shouldn't she be sleeping in the dormitory at this time of the night? After all, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Why would she appear here now? And why was she dressed like this? If Mark didn't look carefully, he really wouldn't be able to recognize his sister-in-law. Although her usual style of dressing was very fashionable, she was still a student at school and usually dressed quite conservatively. But Kelly was wearing such sexy clothes tonight, and she was wearing thick makeup. She looked like a hooker. When Nicole saw her younger sister dressed like this and standing by the side of the road at night, she was a little angry. Good grief! Why is she wearing that getup out here in the middle of the night? What made Nicole even angrier was that at this moment, the man in the white suit standing beside the Maybach suddenly put his hand on Kelly's shoulder. There was an ambiguous smile on his face, and then Kelly and the other sexy woman followed the man into the Maybach. The car drove away very quickly. Nicole's heart skipped a beat. Those women actually got into a car and left with some man in the middle of the night? Something's wrong.
Mark, quick, follow them, Nicole said. Mark also suddenly realized that something was wrong. He quickly started the car and followed the Maybach in front of them. Nicole took out her phone and dialed her sister's number. Hello, Kelly? Where are you? Kelly's voice came from the other end of the phone.
What is it, Nicole? Why did you call me this late at night? I'm at school.
Stupid woman, you're lying to me. You're not really at school. I don't believe that I saw you just now. Why were you standing by the road? Furthermore, you got into a car and left with some man in a white suit. Do you know him? There are too many bad people now. You're very inexperienced. Be careful of him. Nicole was worried about her sister, so she sounded a little anxious. But Kelly said impatiently,
Good grief, sis. Stop going on. All right, I'm not at school. It is like this. It's our classmate's birthday tonight, and we just finished eating out. We were going back to school, but we decided that we are going to sing karaoke. That's why we decided to go play for a while.
Nicole said, Why don't you take a look at what time it is? Do you still want to sing karaoke? You're a student. You need your sleep.
Oh, come on, sis,
Kelly said.
I'm a university student, not a primary school student, all right? What's wrong with me going out to play with my friends occasionally? You're too much of a busybody, so I'm not going to continue this conversation.
Hey, don't hang up. Where are you guys going to sing karaoke? Nicole asked hurriedly.
Pacific Coast Karaoke. It's not far from our school. After we finish singing, we will go back. Don't be such a busybody. Okay, hanging up now.
After Kelly said that, she didn't hesitate to hang up the phone. Obviously, she didn't want her sister to interfere. Nicole became even angrier. At this moment, Mark was still chasing that Maybach, which happened to pass through the neighborhood where he and Nicole lived. Mark said, Nicole, you should get out of the car and go home to rest. You're tired after being busy all day. Leave Kelly to me. Don't worry about her. Nicole said, Mark, please follow them to that Pacific Coast Karaoke right now. Bring Kelly back for me. This wretched kid. What kind of dodgy friends did she make? She wants to sing karaoke in the middle of the night and dressed like that? What if she drinks too much wine and gets taken advantage of? What if something happens to her? It's okay, Nicole. Go home. I'll bring her back. Mark parked the car at the entrance to the house. Nicole got out of the car. She told Mark several times to bring his sister back. Only then did she drag her tired body into the house. She was indeed very tired, and she had to rush back to the company early in the morning to deal with a lot of things, so she could only leave this matter to Mark. She didn't know why, but Nicole had a bad premonition the moment she saw her sister. She had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. While Nicole was worrying about her sister, Kelly, on the other hand, was having a great time. She was part of a group of 5 people, herself and 4 friends. 2 men, Hank Seamus and Hubert Lindstrom, and 2 women, Lisa Rush and Yvonne Wendell. Kelly, Lisa, and Yvonne were all in the same dormitory at LA University. They usually had a good relationship and could be considered the best friends in the school. Hank Seamus was Lisa's boyfriend and was also in their school. His family was rich and powerful, and he was well known at the university. Hubert was different from them. He was not a student at LA University, but he was good friends with Hank. Because today was Lisa's birthday, Hank generously threw a birthday party for her and invited Lisa's roommates, Kelly and Yvonne. He also invited his good friend, Hubert. First, they went to the most famous hotel in the city to have a meal. After that, Hank wanted some fun and suggested going to the Pacific Coast Karaoke to sing. Because they were happy today and wanted to have a good time, Kelly and the other 2 women were dressed up in fashionable and sexy clothing with heavy makeup. Actually, it was nothing. Most young women nowadays like to dress up like this.
But Nicole and Mark didn't like it, so they were a little surprised when they saw Kelly with heavy makeup and sexy clothes. Kelly and the other four soon arrived at Pacific Coast Karaoke. They parked the car and walked straight in. Now this time, it was the peak of the business period, and it was very lively. The manager of the Pacific Coast Karaoke immediately came over and said to Hank, "Please come in. Oh, so it is Mr. Seamus who has graced us with his presence. Our entire Pacific Coast Karaoke is really honored by your presence." Hank's family was rich, so he often brought friends here with him. So the manager of the Pacific Coast Karaoke naturally knew him and regarded him as an important client. Hank waved his hand and casually said, "Mr. Brooks, today is my girlfriend's birthday. We must have fun to our heart's content. So, tonight, I want the best private room there is. I'd like the King's Room, please." Mr. Brooks felt a little awkward when he heard that. He said, "Mr. Seamus, it is a really busy night. There are already guests in the King's Room. How about this? I'll arrange for the Queen's Room, which is second only to the King's Room. What do you think?" Hank's face immediately sank, and he said, "Mr. Brooks, I said that I want the King's Room tonight. It doesn't matter if there are guests inside. Just give them the Queen's Room." Hank was rich and imposing. Mr. Brooks naturally wouldn't dare to offend him. He could only smile and say, "Mr. Seamus, if ordinary guests occupy the King's Room, I'll definitely chase them out. But tonight, the guests in the King's Room are very special. We don't dare to offend them. Please understand our difficulties. You'll have to accept the Queen's Room tonight. I'll give you a 20% discount and all the drinks inside are free." Hank was unhappy. Who wants a 20% discount? Do I, Hank, lack money? The manager didn't know what to say. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little awkward, Hank's girlfriend, Lisa, walked over and said, "Hank, forget it. We don't have many people tonight. The Queen's Room is also nice. We all can have fun in it." In fact, Lisa was also a little dissatisfied with the other guests occupying the King's Room. She was a person who talked about extravagance, but today was her birthday, and she didn't want to cause any unhappiness, so she advised Hank just to take the Queen's Room. Kelly also said, "Hank, let's not waste time here. Today is Lisa's birthday. Time is very precious. We can enjoy ourselves another time." Hank could only reluctantly say to Mr. Brooks, "All right, I won't make things difficult for you today on account of my girlfriend. Hurry up and arrange the Queen's Room for us." Mr. Brooks then let out a sigh of relief and personally led Hank and the others into the Queen's Room in Pacific Coast Karaoke, which was second only to the King's Room. This Queen's Room was more than 200 square meters, and the interior decoration was very luxurious. After Kelly and her friends entered, they started to sing, and the atmosphere immediately became lively. After Lisa finished singing, it was Kelly's turn. Kelly clicked on a Celine Dion song. She held the microphone and stood on the high stage and sang very enthusiastically. Her voice was also very sweet. Hubert quietly said to Hank, "Hank, this woman is not bad. She has a good figure and her singing is so nice. I like it." Hank shook his head. "What? Let me tell you, this Kelly is my girlfriend's roommate and also her best friend. You can't touch her." Hubert said, "Look at what you're saying. I really like this woman. Can't I date her and have her for my girlfriend? Since Lisa is her best friend and your classmate, Hank, you have to help me with this. Pull some strings for me so I can meet her. If she becomes my girlfriend in the future, when we come out to have fun, we can be a couple. Wouldn't it be fun if your best friend and your girlfriend's best friend are a couple?" Hank was a very loyal person. He patted Hubert's shoulder and said, "All right, We are brothers after all. I'll help you. Tonight, I'll bring you guys together. Watch me." Upon hearing this, Hubert immediately beamed with joy. He looked at Kelly, who was singing on the stage. When he thought about how he might be able to hook up with this woman tonight, his heart was filled with joy. He raised his glass and said to Hank, "A toast to you, buddy." Just as the atmosphere in the karaoke heated up, a person suddenly pushed open the door and entered. This person was none other than Mark. After Mark dropped Nicole off at home, he followed Kelly and her friends to Pacific Coast Karaoke. After asking around in the lobby, he found out that they were in the Queen's room. Mark promised Nicole that he would take her sister back to keep her safe. So, he went to the door of the Queen's room, pushed the door open, and entered without hesitation. At first, when Mark came in, no one paid attention to him. They thought it was the waiter who came to deliver the drinks. After Hank finished his beer, he looked up and suddenly saw Mark standing at the door empty-handed. He frowned and said loudly, "Yes, what is it?" Mark stood at the door and was stunned because the atmosphere in the room was a little chaotic. A sexy woman was singing and dancing on the stage, while two young men were drinking. There were also two other women dancing around. But Mark soon identified his sister-in-law as the one who was singing on the stage. After Kelly finished singing Celine Dion's old song, she changed to a more current one. She sang and danced like a professional. She saw a person suddenly push the door open and come in, standing there without moving. Hank never moved from her. He was instantly unhappy when Mark came in. He stood up and walked over to Mark and said, "Who are you? Did you go to the wrong door?" Mark looked at him and said, "I didn't go to the wrong anything. I'm here for Kelly." "Kelly?" Hank was stunned. The song finished and the music stopped. Kelly put down the microphone and jumped from the stage and shouted, "Lisa, it's your turn. Give us an exciting song." Then Kelly immediately saw Mark at the door and was stunned for a moment. "Trash? What are you doing here?" Kelly said. Hank said, "This person said that he's looking for you. Kelly, do you know him?" Everyone was stunned. They turned to look at Mark at the door. Kelly walked over and said to Mark unhappily, "Why are you looking for me?" Mark said, "Kelly, come home with me." The others were stunned once again. Kelly said, "What did you say? Are you sick? Why should I go home with you? Don't you see that I'm busy right now?" Mark said, "It's already very late, and this place isn't suitable for you. Come home with me, or I'll take you back to school." Kelly was very angry, and Hank and the others were also very angry. "Darn it, Kelly, who is this person? His words are really tough. He wants to take you away without an explanation," Hank said. Kelly looked at Mark with disdain and said, "Who else could it be but my useless brother-in-law?" As soon as she said that, the others looked at each other as if they understood something. Lisa shouted at the top of her voice, "I've long heard that your sister is married to a useless man. So it is this person?" Yvonne also said, "Kelly, so this is your useless brother-in-law? I heard that your sister is a company boss. She has money and status, but she married a useless person?" At the time, I didn't believe it. Now it looks like it's true. Kelly originally felt that she couldn't raise her head because she had a useless brother-in-law. Now that Lisa and Yvonne said so too, she felt even more embarrassed and angry at Mark. "You don't need to care about my business. Get lost," Kelly said to Mark without any hesitation. At first, Hank thought that Kelly's family was looking for her. Now that he knew Mark's real identity, he suddenly drawled with disdain. "Yo, bro, who do you think you are? You were so tough when you spoke. But it turns out that you're the useless brother-in-law of Kelly. What's your problem? We're just having some fun. You want to ruin everything? Mark didn't pay any attention to Hank and the others. His purpose of coming here was to take his sister-in-law away. The others had nothing to do with him. Kelly, I promised your sister that I would bring you back. It's already too late. Don't make Nicole worry. Come with me. Mark's tone was firm, but his words offended Hubert. Hubert had been sitting on the sofa, but now he suddenly stood up. He walked over with a face full of anger. He'd been planning to make Kelly his tonight, with Hank's help. But now this annoying person had shown up with the intention of taking Kelly away. Hubert had no intention of letting that happen. This Mark guy was playing with fire. Hubert strode over and got in Mark's face. Dude, this is your fault. We're having fun. Why do you want to take Kelly away? Do you want to ruin our fun? Hubert suppressed the anger in his heart. If it wasn't for Kelly, he would be too lazy to talk nonsense with some stranger. But this stranger was Kelly's brother-in-law, and Hubert was determined to get Kelly tonight. So, for the time being, he didn't want her to see his violent side. Mark was very calm. He could hear danger in Hubert's tone, but he didn't care. I said that I want to take Kelly away. Mark repeated his words again. Hubert's face immediately darkened. Hank shouted from the side, "Don't you dare stress her." Kelly actually went forward and gave Mark a hard push, then said, "Wretched loser, what right do you have to meddle in my business? I don't want to go with you." Feeling the tense atmosphere, Hank had already clenched his fists. He gritted his teeth and looked at Mark, ready to attack at any time. But at this moment, Hubert said, "Bro, why do you want to do that? Today is supposed to be a happy day, so how about this? Since you're the brother-in-law of Kelly, then you're not an outsider. Come in and hang out with us. If you don't want to sing, then sit by the side and watch quietly. Wait till we've had our fun, then of course Kelly will go with you. How about it?" Hubert said these words lightly as he took a step back. In fact, he wanted Mark to stay because he wanted to find an opportunity to humiliate him and teach him a lesson. Mark looked at Hubert's malicious smile and nodded. "All right, I'll wait here." After saying that, he walked into the room and sat down on a sofa. Hank glared at Mark and said to Hubert, "Bro, why did you let him be here? He's a pain. Why don't you just throw him out?" Hubert said, "He's the brother-in-law of Kelly. We can't be rude to him, right? Since he's willing to wait here, let him wait." After saying that, Hubert turned his gaze to Kelly and revealed a flattering smile. "Kelly, let's go. Let's continue singing." So the few of them continued to sing in the private room. One by one, they went up to perform. The others jeered and whistled, especially Kelly. Because she was born with a good voice, she naturally became the queen of singing here. She even surpassed the birthday girl Lisa. Everyone ignored Mark. Mark, on the other hand, sat in a corner of the sofa and watched everything coldly, especially when he saw his sister-in-law singing and dancing on the stage with the microphone. He thought that she was getting crazier and crazier. After they finished singing, they started rolling dice. Whoever lost had to take a drink. For some reason, among the five of them, Kelly lost the greatest number of times, so the others jeered and told her to drink. "Kelly, your points are the smallest. You lost. Come on, drink this beer." Lisa held up a bottle of beer. "Kelly, I won. Your points are less than mine." Hank handed her his newly opened bottle. Kelly, what's happened to you today? Your luck isn't good. You lost again. Drink up, Yvonne said. Kelly shouted, "Ah, why did I lose again? What bad luck." But Kelly didn't know that Hubert and Hank kept winking at each other. Obviously, they were playing a game with her. They were deliberately cheating, so Kelly had to keep drinking. Kelly was a lightweight when it came to alcohol. She was soon drunk. Seeing Kelly's slightly red face, Hubert secretly rejoiced in his heart. He whispered into Hank's ear, "I like this woman so much. I can't wait anymore. Bro, see if you can get her to drink more. I'm going to have her tonight." Hank winked at Hubert, meaning, "Don't worry. I guarantee you that you will be able to get this woman." "No, I can't. I can't drink anymore. I think I might puke." Kelly pushed the beer Hank handed her away and stood up. But as soon as she stood up, she sat back down on the sofa because she was already drunk. Hubert took the opportunity to take Kelly in his arms and smile gently. He said, "Come on, Kelly, drink this beer. You don't want to be a party pooper, do you?" As he spoke, Hubert handed a full beer to Kelly. "I really can't drink anymore," Kelly said. Kelly wanted to push the drink away, but she felt weak all over, so Hubert forced her to drink the whole thing. After that, Hubert suddenly stood up and said, "We drank beer and sang. What else should we do that's fun? Come on, let's crank up the tunes." Very quickly, the disco lights in the private room were turned on. The music was changed to something lively, and Kelly's friends all got up to dance. Kelly staggered to her feet and tried to keep up with them. While they were dancing, Hank gave Hubert a look without anyone noticing. Hubert understood and walked to Kelly's side. One hand slowly wrapped around her waist and pulled her against him. Today is so good. I haven't been this happy in a long time." Kelly was having fun today. Plus, the beers didn't hurt her mood. She danced slowly in Hubert's arms. Hubert's hand had already touched her back, and his whole body was almost touching her body. It was obvious that he was taking advantage of her. Mark was sitting in a corner of the sofa, watching everything with cold eyes. He was looking at the couple who were drunk on beer. But his face was getting darker and darker as he watched the dude in the white suit taking advantage of his sister-in-law. When they were making Kelly drink too many beers, Mark had seen it clearly. On the surface, it was to celebrate Lisa's birthday, but in fact, these people were helping Hubert get his sister-in-law. Poor sister-in-law, Mark thought. Her thoughts are simple, and she doesn't see the conspiracy of these people. Kelly was really drunk by this time, and she was dancing closer and closer to Hubert. In a few minutes, Hubert was probably going to make a move on Mark's sister-in-law. In this chaotic environment, he would secretly act without anyone knowing. It would not be difficult to take serious advantage of Kelly. Dirty pool, Mark thought. Really dirty. Initially, Mark had agreed to stay here because he wanted to wait for them to have fun and then take his sister-in-law away. He didn't want to cause trouble. After all, these people were his sister-in-law's classmates, and it wouldn't be good to make things too difficult for them. But now, Mark's expression was extremely ugly. He looked coldly at the young people standing in the middle of the dance floor, especially when he saw that Hubert had already put his hand inside Kelly's shirt. Mark couldn't hold it in anymore. He stood up from the sofa and shouted, "Enough!" His shout came very suddenly and drowned out the music. Then Mark suddenly walked to the music machine and pressed the pause button. The music in the room suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. Hubert and the others were all stunned. Wait, what? Who turned off the music? Hubert's plan was ruined, and he flew into a rage. Hank looked at Mark and said angrily, "Wretched fool, are you crazy? Why did you turn off our music?" Mark didn't bother with them. He walked over and pulled his sister-in-law, who was still in Hubert's arms, to his side and said, "Kelly, come with me." He couldn't wait any longer. He just wanted to take his sister-in-law and leave this chaotic environment immediately. Kelly was obviously drunk. She kept muttering, "So drunk. I still want to drink." Mark didn't care about that. He had Kelly's hand and walked out of the room with her stumbling behind him. "Stop right there," Hubert shouted. He took 2 steps forward and stopped in front of Mark and Kelly. "You waste of space. I'm having fun and I'll not allow to let you ruin it. If you dare to take Kelly away, then don't even think about leaving here tonight." Hubert didn't want to waste any more time talking nonsense with Mark, because this good-for-nothing had completely messed up his great plan. Mark's face was cold. His eyes had already narrowed. He didn't even look at this guy. Instead, he said word by word, "Get out of my way. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." These words made Hubert and Hank extremely angry. Hank moved over to stand beside Hubert, both of them blocking Mark's exit. Hubert sneered. "Yeah, you're just a useless piece of trash like Kelly says. What can you possibly do to us?" In the Queen's room of Pacific Coast Karaoke, Mark faced off with Hank and Hubert. It looked like the two sides were about to attack each other. At this moment, Yvonne suddenly remembered something. She walked forward and said to Hubert and Hank, "Hank, Hubert, forget it. Let's not fight here. This is Julius's place." The Julius which Yvonne was talking about was the gangland boss of California, Julius Darren. Hubert and Hank knew very well that this Julius Darren was not someone to be trifled with. He'd been in gangs since he was a teenager and had been terrifying his enemies for many years. He'd fought his way up through the ranks, and now he was the current king of the underworld of California. This Pacific Coast Karaoke was Julius Darren's place, and what Julius Darren hated the most was anyone causing trouble in his place. This was something Hubert and Hank both knew very well. Yvonne said again, "Hank, we don't dare to cause trouble in Julius's place. After all, we can't afford to offend him." Hank's expression also changed, but soon he snorted and said, "Julius is a prominent figure. Of course, I don't dare to go against him, but I, Hank, have brought friends to Pacific Coast Karaoke time and time again. I'm already a VIP customer here. Actually, the reason why I brought my friends here is because I want to try my luck. Let's see if we can meet Julius." Hubert said, "Hank, I was wondering why you always bring your friends to Pacific Coast Karaoke. It turns out that you want to find an opportunity to get to know Julius." Hank nodded. "Of course, I'm still a student, but sooner or later I'll graduate and have to make my own way. My father often told me if I want to be able to make a name for myself, I need all kinds of connections. I need to know all kinds of people. And Julius is one of the most important people in all California. If we can make friends with him, it will be great for the Seamus family. So today, I'm not afraid of causing trouble here. It just so happens that I want to cause trouble. It's a good way to attract Julius's attention." When Hank said this, the sneer on his face became even stronger. He clenched his fists, then looked at Mark, who was standing in front of him. "Wretched loser, I'm in a good mood today. I didn't want to argue with you, but you decided to run the gauntlet. Today, I'll take the opportunity to teach you a lesson. Let's have a fight and get Julia's attention, so maybe I can have an opportunity to get to know him." As for Hubert, he didn't want to waste any more time. He said, "Hank, don't waste any more time. Beat this idiot up." As Hubert spoke, he cracked his fingers. He was different from Hank. He was not a student, but an outsider. He could be considered a hooligan. He'd done a lot of fighting and killing. Now he owned a few billiard halls and a bar. He couldn't be compared to Julius, but he was more or less known in the city. How could he be afraid of a useless person like Mark? But just as Hubert and Hank reached an agreement and were about to teach Mark a lesson, the door of the private room was pushed open all of a sudden. Lisa appeared at the door. She shouted at the top of her voice, "Hank, someone is bullying me." Hubert and Hank were stunned and turned their eyes to Lisa. "Lisa, what happened to you?" Hank saw his girlfriend's upset face, and there were tears at the corner of her eyes. He looked at her with concern. Lisa said, "I went to the bathroom just now and some guy patted my butt." Hearing this, Hubert, Hank, and Yvonne were all stunned for a moment. "What did you say? Someone patted your butt?" Hank frowned. "He tried to molest me." Lisa shouted and started to cry. She threw herself into Hank's arms and sobbed into his shirt. It turned out that when Hubert and Hank were talking with Mark, Lisa wanted to go to the bathroom because she had drunk some wine, so she quietly went out. At that time, Hubert, Hank, Kelly, and Yvonne were all focused on Mark. No one noticed that Lisa got up and went to the bathroom. When Lisa went to the washroom, she passed by a corridor and saw a man in his 30s standing there looking at her with lustful eyes. Because Lisa was wearing sexy clothes tonight, and she was pretty and had a good figure, she often attracted men's attention. She was used to having men stare at her. So when this man looked at her, she didn't care. She just glared at him and secretly scolded him for being a hooligan. Then she walked over to the washroom. She didn't expect that after going to the washroom and getting ready to return to the private room, the man would actually still be standing there. He actually reached out and slapped her butt as she passed. He laughed foolishly and said, "Hey, beautiful woman." This made Lisa extremely angry. If he'd only looked at her, it would have been fine, but now he was openly touching her. Normally, and if he'd been a normal kind of guy, it might have been fine to hang out with him. But now that she was Hank's girlfriend, she certainly didn't want to be approached by other guys, especially not weird other guys. That was why Lisa was so anxious. She cursed at him for being a pervert. Then she raised her hand and hit him in the face. Unexpectedly, he didn't even dodge. No matter how many times Lisa slapped his face, the guy didn't seem to care at all. He still laughed foolishly and stared at Lisa's boobs with a lustful gaze. Lisa was thoroughly angered and a little scared. She turned around and ran into the private room to tell Hank. After listening to Lisa's story, Hank was furious. "What? Someone dared touch you? Do they want to die?" Although Hank was a selfish young man, he was very loyal to the people he cared about. Recently, he'd just hooked up with Lisa and the two of them were hot for each other. He certainly wouldn't tolerate anyone else trying to steal his girlfriend. Hank and Hubert were prepared to teach Mark a lesson, but now they couldn't care less about Mark. Hank said to Lisa,
Lisa, don't be afraid. Come and show me this guy. He has a death wish. After saying that, Hank pulled Lisa out of the room. As Hank's friend, Hubert naturally couldn't sit idly by. He glared fiercely at Mark and said, "Dude, if you have the guts, don't leave. I'll settle the score with you later." After saying that, he followed closely behind Hank and Lisa out of the room. Mark sneered. He didn't want to cause any trouble. He had just wanted to take his sister-in-law and leave this chaotic place as soon as possible. But now, he didn't want to leave, because he had a premonition that there would be a good show in the next few minutes. So he simply sat down on the sofa to see what would happen. And because Kelly was completely drunk, Yvonne helped her and they sat down on the sofa. Not long after that, Hank and the others came back. They saw Hank carrying a person in his arms. This person looked to be in his 30s, but his clothes were dirty and he was short and apparently lifeless. After Hank got this person into the private room, he dropped him to the ground. He pointed at him and scolded loudly, "You idiot! How dare you touch my girlfriend's butt? Watch how I teach you a lesson." Hubert and Lisa also stood up and closed the door of the private room. Lisa pointed at the short man who was kicked to the ground by Hank and scolded, "How dare you molest me? Do you know whose girlfriend I am? Are you blind?" Lisa turned her angry eyes to Hank. "Hank, this man touched my butt just now. I want you to beat him up and break one of his hands." Hank stepped forward and grabbed the man's collar. He raised his hand and slapped the man's face several times. He didn't stop until the man's face was swollen and bruised. The short man didn't fight back after being hit. He just sat there and giggled. He continued to look at Lisa with a perverted look. He even kept muttering, "Big beauty, I wonder." Hank was so angry that his lungs felt like they were about to explode, and he cursed, "This guy's out of his mind." Hank and Hubert could see that the man in front of them was a little crazy. When he thought about how his girlfriend had been touched by an idiot, Hank became even angrier. He raised his leg again and kicked the fool a few times. Hubert also walked forward and grabbed the guy's hair with one hand. He said coldly, "You idiot! You dare to molest my buddy's girlfriend? You must be tired of living. Quickly, apologize to the lady and to my friend, or else."
At first, Hank thought it was just some guy with no respect who molested his girlfriend Lisa. It was one thing to drag a guy like that into the private room and beat him up, but Hank didn't expect this person to be a fool. No matter how he beat him, the guy didn't fight back. He just kept laughing. Hank sneered, thinking, where did this idiot come from? Why did he come to Julius's place to cause trouble? And he even touched my girlfriend. Today, Hank would teach this fool a lesson, and this would be like helping Julius swat a fly. Hank and Hubert gave the guy a good hiding, and Lisa even stepped in for a little revenge too. At one point, Hubert broke an empty beer bottle over his head, leaving a trail of blood flowing down over his nose. All the time they did this, Mark just watched coldly from the side. But Yvonne couldn't bear to watch anymore. She said, "Hubert, Hank, I think we should just forget it. This guy's not right in the head. Don't hurt him, just throw him out. Don't let one little incident ruin our night." Hank didn't want to give up. He opened a bottle of beer and forced the guy to drink it. "That hand of yours is not clean enough to touch my girlfriend. Drink this bottle of beer for me and I'll spare you." Although the guy was stupid, he knew he was in trouble. At that moment, he started crying. Hank impatiently raised the bottle and forced him to drink it. At this moment, the door of the private room was pushed open. A waiter walked in with a plate of fruit in his hand. Because Hank and the others were VIP customers of Pacific Coast Karaoke, every time they came here to play, the manager would order the waiter to bring a plate of fruit. But who would have thought that the moment the waiter pushed open the door and entered, he would see Hank and the others beating on some poor guy? The waiter was stunned. His entire body froze. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the sight of Hank forcing the guy to drink the beer. The waiter was so shocked, he dropped the plate of fruit with a clatter. Apples and oranges rolled away over the floor. Then the waiter turned around and ran. The waiter ran all the way to the king's room. At this moment, the king's room was bustling with noise and excitement. The waiter pushed open the door and shouted, out of breath, "Julius, sir, it's bad. Something has happened." With this shout, the bustling king's room immediately quieted down. The music stopped abruptly. Everyone turned to look at the waiter. A young man who was standing beside the music machine, his muscles bulging, shouted at the waiter, "Hey, don't you see Julius is entertaining guests to a banquet? And you dare to come in and disturb him? Get out!" The male server turned his gaze to a middle-aged man in his 40s sitting in the middle of the sofa with a sad face. He had a powerful, muscular body and a scar on his face. "Julius, sir, Teddy was beaten up," the waiter said. This sentence stunned everyone present. Julius had been sitting in the middle of the sofa with a cigarette in his hand. He stood up. "What did you say?" "I said Teddy was beaten up." The waiter repeated his words again. Beside Julius, another man who was in his 30s and a bit fat, and a man with a big golden chain around his neck also stood up. Julius pointed at the waiter and said, "What did you say? Someone beat Teddy up? Kid, you better not be blowing wind. Who would dare beat up my little brother?" "Julius, sir, I dare not lie to you." The waiter looked nervous. "Just now, I went to the Queen's room to deliver a fruit plate. I saw with my own eyes a few guests in the Queen's room beating Teddy." The waiter's trembling voice told Julius what he had witnessed. This time, everyone in the King's room exploded. "What? Someone dared to hit Teddy? Teddy is Julius's brother. Who has the guts to do a thing like that?" The man with the gold chain yelled. Hank and the others had asked for the King's room because it was the most luxurious private room in the entire Pacific Coast Karaoke. But the manager said that the King's room had already been booked by a guest. What the manager didn't say was that the guest was none other than the boss of the Pacific Coast Karaoke, Julius Darren. As mentioned before, this Julius Darren was one of the top gangland figures in all California. He had countless bars and entertainment centers in his portfolio. He could be considered the gangland boss of all California. Today, Julius had invited a distinguished guest to his place. He was the boss of a certain city in Nevada by the name of Mike Carter. He was the fat man with the big golden chain. Carter came to California to work with Julius and invest in building the largest entertainment center in California. Carter was his distinguished guest. Building a good relationship with his new partner was Julius's prime interest right now, so he invited Carter to his own Pacific Coast Karaoke and arranged the luxurious King's room for Carter's reception. he'd instructed the waiter that they weren't to be disturbed without an excellent reason. At first, Julius and Carter were having a good time, and the atmosphere was harmonious. But then, the waiter suddenly barged in and told them that Julius's brother had been beaten up. Julius was furious. That was his brother, the only family he had in this world. Although Teddy had intellectual and physical disabilities, he was still family. Anyone who knew Julius knew that he was a cruel and merciless man. But he loved his brother very much. When Julius was a teenager and had just joined his first gang, he was skinny and often bullied. But his brother, who was only 1 year younger than him, always protected him. Once, when Julius fought with others, he was besieged by more than a dozen people. While he was on the ground, one guy had lunged at him with a knife. Teddy jumped in between them and risked his life to save Julius. He succeeded, but the knife sank deep into his leg. As a result, his leg was badly damaged, was crippled, and had never healed properly. Another time, Teddy had thrown himself between Julius and the guy he was fighting. He'd taken a baseball bat to the head, which had cracked his skull and resulted in brain damage. He was never the same again, but that made Julius love him even more. Later on, as Julius became more and more important, he relied on his own ruthless strength to make a name for himself on the streets. Until, now, he was the gangland boss of California. All these years, for the sake of Teddy's safety, he'd always let his brother live with him in LA. After all, Julius had a lot of enemies in his dark life, and he couldn't stand the thought of anyone hurting Teddy to get at him. He found a caregiver in LA to take care of his brother. But the nanny died of some illness, and Julius hadn't been able to find a suitable one yet. So Julius simply brought his brother to work with him and kept him close by. Although Julius's employees worked hard and didn't need constant supervision, Julius often came to Pacific Coast Karaoke. Teddy naturally came with him, so all the waiters and other staff in Pacific Coast Karaoke knew about their boss's vulnerable brother and helped to watch out for him. Poor Teddy. Every day, he had nothing to do but wander around the place. He had free run, and usually never caused a problem. Today was just unfortunate. While Hank and the others were hanging out and trying to bully Mark, Lisa went to the washroom and happened to meet Teddy. Although he no longer had the mind of a man, sometimes he had the natural desire to be one. So when he saw Lisa, such a beautiful and sexy woman, walk past him, he naturally couldn't help but stare. He even raised his hand and touched Lisa's butt. If it was any other guest, they would know that this guy was Julius's brother. If he touched them, they would just let him. They wouldn't dare to make a fuss about it. But Hank and the others didn't know Teddy or his situation. So this matter was destined to blow up. When Julius heard that his own brother was beaten up, he was furious. Without saying anything, he called his bodyguards and went straight to the Queen's room. Carter also followed along with his subordinates. He was curious. Who could be so brave or so stupid as to hit Julius's brother? In the Queen's room at Pacific Coast Karaoke, Hank and Hubert were forcing Teddy, Julius's disabled brother, to kneel down and lick Lisa's boots. "You dare to touch my girlfriend? You'll only deserve to lick my girlfriend's boots," Hank said. As Hank spoke, he slapped the back of Teddy's head and scolded loudly. Lick them for me. Lick them clean." At this moment, there was a bang, and the door of the Queen's room was kicked open from the outside. Julius and his subordinates rushed into the room. With one glance, he saw his brother, face covered in blood, kneeling like a dog, being forced to lick some woman's shoes. Julius's face immediately darkened. Julius's men were also stunned. They couldn't believe what was happening in front of them. Their boss's closest relative, his beloved brother, was actually being bullied like this. Hank and the others looked up and saw a group of people aggressively rushing in and realized they were in trouble. Two of Julius's bodyguards rushed forward and kicked Hank and Hubert to the side. They pointed at them and said loudly, "You guys must be tired of living. How dare you hit our brother? Do you have a death wish?" Hank and Hubert were both stunned by the kicks. Lisa was also stunned. Julius walked over and looked at Teddy, who was still on the ground licking Lisa's shoes. Julius's face had an ugly expression, and he said in fury, "You let someone force my brother to lick your shoes? How dare you!" Then Julius slapped Lisa's face. Lisa screamed and fell to the ground, clutching her cheek. "You can't hit my girlfriend," Hank said. Immediately, one of Julius's bodyguards hit him. "I just did, loser. You think you have the right to bully people, but they're not allowed to fight back? Well, you don't. You bullied Teddy, so now we're going to bully you." Hank's face filled with anger. "So you guys are with this fool? This fool? Well, let me tell you that he molested my girlfriend. Anyone who messes with what's mine will pay," Hank said. The bodyguard punched him again. "Don't blame Teddy. Any idiot can see he's disabled. He wouldn't have hurt her." "You guys are going too far." Hank was furious. He'd been hit twice in a row, and he felt very embarrassed. He clenched his fists and rushed toward the bodyguard, wanting to take him down. But his fighting skills were no match for the bodyguard. Before he could get close to him, the bodyguard kicked him to the ground. When Hubert saw this scene, he knew that the situation was not good. After all, he was more mature than a student like Hank and had more life experience. He didn't think Teddy was really dangerous, but he was always happy to get involved with a bit of bullying, especially when he was on the winning side. But now this group of Teddy's supporters was here. They outnumbered Hubert and Hank, and they were very aggressive. If he were to fight them head-on, he was afraid it would go badly. So Hubert took a step forward and said, "Hey, bros, don't get angry. I'm sorry we hurt your friend, but he molested my buddy's woman. We just want to teach him a lesson because no matter who he is, he needs to know how to behave. We hit him and then you hit us. I think we're square. What do you say?" Hubert knew that a wise man would never fight when the odds were against him. But he never expected that before he could finish his words, Julius would walk over and look at him with a cold smile. "You think we should let it go just like that?" Julius had a smile on his face, but his voice became incomparably cold, causing Hubert's heart to thump. Both he and Hank had heard of Julius's famous name, but they had never seen him in person. But seeing the imposing manner of this bald man, Hubert and Hank felt a little weak inside. Hubert continued to smile and said, "Brother, we are all here to have a good time. Why do you have to make a fuss over one small incident? Let's just let bygones be bygones." Just as Hubert said this, Julius suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed his neck. Hubert was stunned. He couldn't breathe. Julius's face became colder and colder, and there was a hint of ferociousness in it. He stared at Hubert and said, word by word, "If someone beat up your brother like this, would you just let it go? Would you just stand by and let the culprits get away with it?" Julius sneered. "Maybe filth like you wouldn't do anything, but I, Julius Darren, am not filth like you." Hubert was scared and couldn't breathe, but when he heard the word Julius, his eyes widened. He looked at the bald man who had his hands around his throat in disbelief.
You're Julius?"
Hubert squeezed the few words from his throat with difficulty. Hank, who was standing at the side, was also dumbfounded. This bald-headed man with the extraordinary presence was actually Julius, the boss of Pacific Coast Karaoke, gangland boss of all California. One of Julius's bodyguards said, "Julius, let's not waste time talking to them. These people beat Teddy up like this. In my opinion, we should just break their arms and legs and throw them out." Hearing the bodyguard's words, Hank and Hubert realized that the bald man in front of them was indeed Julius. The two of them were completely shocked, and their minds went blank for a moment. Hank's eyes widened. "Julius? You really are Julius? I didn't realize. I've offended you. I'm so sorry, Julius. Please, spare my life. Spare my life." Suddenly, Hank remembered something. The gangland boss of California, Julius, did have a brother. It was said that he'd been injured protecting Julius. His brain had been damaged by someone, and he'd been in a daze all this time. But Julius had at first housed him in the country, and very few people had seen him. But Hank had never taken this matter to heart. He'd had no idea that the guy who molested his girlfriend and he and Hubert had beaten up today was actually Julius's brother. This was bad news. Hank wasn't happy. The reason why he'd brought his friends to Pacific Coast Karaoke to hang out time and time again was because of Julius. Hank had always hoped to meet him. He'd never thought that he would accidentally offend his hero. This was terrible. Hubert was also completely dumbfounded. He was no one in particular out on the street, and now he'd unintentionally offended the big boss of California. His life was over. Hubert didn't even have the strength to beg for mercy. He just closed his eyes. He remembered that he and Hank had just beaten and humiliated Teddy. They had made him kneel down and lick Lisa's shoes. But Teddy was Julius's brother. "I'm going to die," Hubert thought. He thought that Julius would strangle him to death, but he never thought that at this moment, Julius would suddenly let go of his neck. Hubert started coughing violently. Julius waved his hand and asked a subordinate to bring a chair for him to sit on. He placed it in the middle of the room. He walked over and sat down on the chair. First, he asked his men to help his poor, silly brother to the side. Then, Julius looked at Hank and Hubert. Lisa, who had been scared silly, said, "Please don't hurt us." Hearing this, Hank and Hubert's hearts trembled violently. From the beginning to the end of this altercation, Mark had been calmly sitting in a corner of the sofa. Yvonne was supporting Kelly, who was drunk, and both of them also sat there. When Yvonne found out that the bald guy in front of her was Julius, she knew that their fun was over. As for Mark, from the beginning, he'd felt like he was watching a show. Now, just as he'd expected, the show was getting more and more interesting. What was going to happen next? Julius sat there on his chair like it was a throne, lit a cigarette, and took a puff. He glanced at Hank and Hubert and said, I think we'll have to cut off one of your hands." This short sentence scared Hank and Hubert so much that their faces turned pale. Both of them knelt in front of Julius almost at the same time.
"Julius, please, no. We're sorry. Spare us."
Julius coldly harumphed. "Spare you? Then my brother was beaten up by you for nothing? Cut the garbage. Which hand did you hit my brother with? Now, break it. And if you can't do it, I can help you." After Julius said that, the bodyguards behind him took a step forward and looked at Hank and Hubert. One of the bodyguards saw Mark and the two women sitting on the sofa, so he said to Julius, "Julius, there are more people over there on the sofa." Julius looked up and glanced at Mark, who was sitting as still as a statue, and Yvonne and Kelly, who were sitting next to him. Julius smiled and said, "I'd almost forgot that they have accomplices." They are quite calm. Julius gave his bodyguards a look. The two bodyguards walked over, and one of them grabbed Yvonne and Kelly's arms and pulled the two women in front of Julius. Yvonne was so scared that she shouted,
"Julius, this has nothing to do with us. We didn't attack your brother. It really does have nothing to do with us."
The other bodyguard walked over to Mark and said, "Kid, you dare to be so calm in front of Julius? Get over there." The bodyguard raised his hand and was about to pull Mark to his feet, but just as he reached out, he felt a pain in his wrist and found that one of his hands had been firmly grabbed by Mark. Mark slowly stood up from the sofa. He looked coldly at the bodyguard and said, "I can walk by myself." After he said that, he let go. The bodyguard staggered and almost fell to the ground. Mark walked to Julius with a calm expression. Julius puffed his cigarette and narrowed his eyes. He looked at the young man in front of him. He felt that this young man had a different kind of presence, but he still didn't think much of him. "Young man, you are either stunningly arrogant and conceited, or stunningly stupid. Have you any idea who I am?" Julius said. Mark looked at him and said lightly, "I'm just here to watch the show. It has nothing to do with me." After saying that, Mark turned his gaze to Kelly. "Kelly, let's go." After he said that, he went forward to pull his sister-in-law close to him and was about to walk out the door with her when Julius's expression changed. "Do you really think you can just walk away like that? From me? It's not quite that easy, young man," Julius said. Indeed, it wasn't that easy, because Julius's subordinates had already blocked Mark's path. "Like I said, I'm just here to watch the show. It has nothing to do with us." Mark repeated what he said. Julius slowly stood up and walked to Mark. A cold light shot out from his eagle-like eyes. He spat out a smoke ring. Then he said, "You're with them. But I, Julius, am a person who knows right from wrong. Since you're not involved, you just have to break 3 fingers." What Julius meant was that as Hank and Hubert had hit his brother, he wanted them to break one of their hands. As for Mark, although he was with them, he didn't participate in the fight, and Julius understood that. So Mark only had to break 3 of his fingers. As for these 3 women, Julius turned his eyes to Lisa, Yvonne, and Kelly. His face lit with a cruel and vulgar smile. "Oh my, I must consider my brother. Although his brain is damaged, today's matter reminded me of something. As his brother, it's time for me to help Teddy satisfy his adult desires. Julius smiled and continued. The three of you aren't bad looking. You can stay and be my brother's women. But remember, you're just my brother's playthings. When he gets tired of playing with you, you can leave. As soon as they heard these words, Julius's subordinates all laughed and grinned at Lisa, Yvonne, and Kelly. Teddy's luck down today. There are 3 women for Teddy to deal with all of a sudden. Lisa and Yvonne turned white. What? Julius was going to make them that fool's playthings? It would be better to die directly. As for Kelly, because she was drunk, her body was swaying as she stood there. If not for Mark supporting her, she would have fallen on the ground a long time ago. Hank and Hubert were completely dumbfounded. They knew that today's matter had become serious, but they hadn't realized how serious it really was. Julius actually intended to make them break one of their hands. He also wanted Hank's girlfriend, Lisa, and her friends to be Teddy's playthings.
Julius, please spare us. We won't dare to do it again.
In a panic, Hank and Hubert once again knelt down and begged for mercy.
Julius, can you spare me this time for my father's sake? My father is the boss of a building material company, Seamus Contracting.
Hank panicked and even mentioned his father's name in hopes it would save him. Julius narrowed his eyes and sneered. Seamus Contracting, a tiny company. Your father isn't worth my time. Julius's eyes turned cold, and he shouted loudly. What are you still standing there for? Hurry up and do it. Then a bodyguard stepped forward and kicked Hank and Hubert a few times. He threw 2 sharp knives on the floor in front of them. He shouted angrily. Julius told you to cut off one of your hands, didn't you hear him? Do it now. And you? Another bodyguard walked in front of Mark with a short knife. He waved the knife in front of Mark's fingers and said, You are lucky, kid. Julius is very kind. He only wants you to break 3 fingers. Kid, be smart. Just get it done. Don't make Julius angry. The bodyguard also threw the knife at Mark's feet. He looked at Mark coldly and said, Do it. Hank and Hubert's hearts froze. They knew they couldn't avoid this disaster. They never expected that they would fall into Julius's hands. They trembled as they picked up the short knives on the ground. Breaking one of their hands could still save their lives. But if they really angered Julius, they might even lose their lives. Thinking of this, Hank gritted his teeth, raised the short knife, and was about to chop at his left wrist. But at this moment, a cold voice sounded without warning. You want me to break my fingers? I'm afraid you're not worthy. Hank's short knife was about to hit his wrist when it suddenly stopped. He opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the voice, wondering who would say such a thing. Then, he realized it was Mark. Julius frowned and turned his eyes to Mark. Kid, what did you just say? I said you want me to break 3 of my fingers. You're not worthy. Mark repeated his words calmly. Julius suddenly extinguished the cigarette butt and stood up from the chair. He glared at Mark and said, Kid, I think you're pretentious. I'm not worthy? There is nothing in this world that I, Julius, am not worthy of. Not to mention your 3 fingers. Even if I wanted to take your life, you would have to give it to me, obediently. Mark smiled. Take my life? I'm afraid you don't have the ability. You. Julius was completely enraged. He was the gangland boss of California, and no one had ever talked back to him in such a manner. The person in front of him was just a young brat, and he actually dared to speak to him in such a manner. He really did have a death wish. Julius raged and said loudly, "Kid, are you going to fight me, Julius, head on today?" Mark said, "It's not that I want to fight you head on. I just said that this matter has nothing to do with me. I only want to take my sister-in-law away, but you don't agree. You're just looking for trouble." Mark looked at Lisa and the others, who were so scared that their faces had turned pale. He continued, "I don't like either Seamus or Lindstrom there. I don't care what you do with them, but these 3 women, you won't be able to have them today." Mark was a person who could distinguish right from wrong. Hank and Hubert weren't good people at all. He'd seen through them long ago, so he didn't intend to interfere with Julius's punishment. But no matter what, Lisa and Yvonne were his sister-in-law's classmates and best friends. Although Kelly mocked him continually, for the sake of his wife, he still intended to protect his sister-in-law and her friends. "What did you say? I can't touch these 3 women?" "There is no one in the entirety of California that I, Julius, can't touch." Julius stood up as he spoke and grinned at Mark. "Just watch me," he said. Julius was so angry that he laughed. He walked in front of Lisa and lifted her up with one arm like she weighed nothing. His other hand pinched Lisa's cheek, hard. "Little woman, I want you to be my brother's toy. What's wrong? You don't want to?" Although Julius's voice was not loud, the cold light that shot out from his eyes was like a sharp sword, making Lisa tremble all over. I'm willing." Terrified, Lisa said 3 words with a trembling voice. Although she couldn't bear the thought of what Julius suggested, she saw no way out and just hoped she could survive. She looked at Hank, who was crouching on the ground like a beaten dog, and knew that her boyfriend could no longer save her. Hank couldn't even protect himself anymore, so how could he take care of her? In order to save her life, Lisa could only obey Julius. Julius smiled. He slowly let go of Lisa. "At least you know what to do." Julius then turned his eyes to Yvonne, who was beside him. He asked with a smile, "And you? I asked you to be my brother's toy too. Are you willing?" Yvonne panicked.
Julius, spare me."
Yvonne's knees went soft, and she knelt on the ground. Julius suddenly raised his voice and said sternly, "I'm asking you, are you willing to be my brother's toy?" Yvonne's entire body started to shake like a leaf. She tremblingly said, I'm willing. As long as you don't kill me, I'm willing to do anything." Julius laughed out loud and looked at Mark with contempt. "Kid, did you hear that? They did it voluntarily. I didn't force them." Then he looked at Kelly, who was supported by Mark, and said, "And that woman in your arms. None of them will escape today." Julius walked to Mark. He raised his hand and was about to pull Kelly to him. Unexpectedly, just as his hand reached over, there was a bang. Mark attacked suddenly. He threw a powerful punch straight at Julius's heart. It was impossible for Julius to defend himself. Although this young man in front of him was calm and a little arrogant, Julius had thought that he was just pretending to be powerful and hadn't paid much attention to him. He certainly never thought that this young man would suddenly attack him. And this punch, it actually forced Julius to take 2 steps back. A dull pain came from his chest. No matter what, he, Julius, was the gangland boss of California. He'd lived a life of fighting and killing. Ordinary people couldn't do anything to him, yet this young man in front of him only used 1 punch, and he was forced back 2 steps. Mark's punch ignited Julius's anger. Julius gritted his teeth and ordered the bodyguard behind him. "Cripple this kid." With a growl, all the bodyguards went forward at the same time and surrounded Mark. "Stupid kid, how dare you attack Julius? You don't know what pain is. Beat him up." The bodyguard at the front shouted coldly. He took the lead and threw a punch at Mark's face. Then the other bodyguards also rushed forward. Mark quickly threw a punch and sent the bodyguard at the front flying. The bodyguard was tall and big, with huge muscles. He was definitely a skilled fighter, but Mark only used 1 punch, and it sent him flying. The remaining bodyguards didn't clearly see what was going on. They only knew that someone had flown out and landed on the ground with a thud. Their faces were filled with fear. Even Julius's expression changed. The next second, Mark's eyes narrowed. He said to the frightened Yvonne, "You, come over and support the Kelly. Let me take care of this bunch of trash." Yvonne stood up shakily and looked at Mark in disbelief.
What are you doing? Do you really want to fight Julius? Are you crazy? You're no match for them."
Hank and Hubert were scared silly. Hank couldn't help but point at Mark and curse. "Mark, do you want to get us killed? Fighting Julius head on? Who do you think you are?" Hubert was terrified. Maybe, if he and Hank broke one of his hands as Julius wanted, this matter could be settled. At least they could keep their lives. But now this useless person called Mark, he actually wanted to go against Julius's men. And he'd just punched Julius. He'd get them all killed. "Wretched fool, what are you doing? Kneel down and beg forgiveness from Julius. Perhaps Julius will show mercy and spare our lives. Do you really want us all to die?" Hubert shouted. At this moment, he wished that Mark dropped dead, because his intuition told him that he might be implicated by Mark. Lisa suddenly crawled to Julius's feet and hugged one of his legs tightly. She cried and said,
"Julius, I'm willing. I'm willing to be Teddy's toy, as long as you don't kill me. This useless Mark guy, he has offended you, but it has nothing to do with us. Please forgive him."
After saying that, Lisa let go of Julius and crawled in front of Julius's brother.
"Teddy, I'm willing to be your woman and serve you."
As she spoke, Lisa stood up, trembling with fear. Then she actually picked up that fool's hand and held it tightly.
"Teddy, I'm willing to be your toy."
Although that fool had been beaten by Hank and the others until his face was covered in blood, when a sexy and beautiful woman like Lisa grabbed his hand, he was thrilled. Beautiful woman, Teddy babbled. This scene made Julius very satisfied. He looked at Lisa and said, "You're a smart woman. As long as you serve my brother well, I'll not touch a single hair on your head." Lisa felt as if she had received a special pardon. She heaved a long sigh of relief. Just now, she saw that Mark didn't care about his life or losing it. He didn't know his limits and wanted to fight Julius head on. She was afraid that she would do the same to Julius in a fit of anger. After all, Julius was the big boss of the all California. He would definitely do something to kill someone. Lisa was really afraid that she would be implicated by Mark. That was why she took the initiative to beg for mercy from Julius. She even offered her body to his brother in the hope of keeping her life. When they saw Lisa get a special pardon, Hank and Hubert hurriedly crawled to Julius's feet. Hank groveled in front of Julius.
Julius, that useless trash with the last name Johnson doesn't care about you. He's courting death, but this has nothing to do with us. We know that we were wrong. Julius, please spare us. As long as you spare us, we are willing to do whatever you want from now on, Hubert added.
Julius coldly glanced at Hank and Hubert, who were kneeling at his feet, then said,
You two bullied my brother, and you deserve to die 10,000 times for your crimes. But at least you know what's good for you. A wise man knows when to submit to circumstances. Fine, I won't pursue this matter any further. You two might prove useful to me.
Upon hearing these words, Hubert and Hank heaved a long sigh of relief. Julius would no longer vent his anger on them because of Mark's overestimation of his abilities. He would even agree to let them serve him and not maim or kill them. That was good. When he saw Hank, Hubert, and Lisa were willing to sacrifice their dignity to save their lives and beg Julius for mercy, Mark looked at them with disdain. At this moment, Julius turned his eyes to Yvonne.
What about you? As long as you agree to be my servant and my brother's plaything, I can spare you.
Yvonne's heart trembled, and she blurted out,
I'm willing.
Mark shook his head and sighed. He originally wanted to protect these two women. He didn't expect them to be so ready to give in order to protect their cheap lives. They didn't even hesitate to become Julius's slaves or his brother's toys. Forget it, Mark thought. Since they were willing to wag their tails and beg for mercy, then he didn't need to get involved in their business. Everyone had their own way of surviving. Julius looked at Mark.
Kid, do you see? Nothing is more important than your life. If you kneel and beg for mercy like them and are willing to be my slave, I can spare you.
Mark's lips curved into a cold smile. Then he suddenly shouted, "Go to hell!" Then he suddenly pushed his sister-in-law lightly onto the sofa, quickly slid his feet over the ground, and arrived in front of Julius in a flash. There were two slapping sounds. Julius didn't even have time to react. He only felt a burning pain on both sides of his face. Mark slapped Julius twice at lightning speed. His speed was so fast that it made people confused. Julius's bodyguards didn't even have time to react. It took several seconds for them to realize that their boss had been slapped twice by that kid. This was a great humiliation to Julius. He shouted with a hoarse voice, "Kill him!" But before his bodyguards could do anything, Mark had already made the first move. He turned around and jumped into the crowd of bodyguards. A series of cracking sounds came. Mark was like a tornado. Not only was he extremely fast, but he also had great strength. He used both his fists and his feet. Without any hesitation, without any pause, it was as if he did everything at once. He threw Julius's 7 or 8 bodyguards onto the ground. After the thumping sounds ended, the scene became silent. Those bodyguards all lay on the ground in unbearable pain. They couldn't even stand up. Julius was stunned. Everyone else was stunned too. Mark didn't hesitate. He jumped over the men on the floor and arrived in front of Julius like an avenging angel. He raised his hand and aimed at Julius's face. Julius's eyes widened. He felt the wind of Mark's hand and braced for the blow, but it never came. In a millisecond, Mark's hand changed trajectory and suddenly grabbed Julius's neck and threw him away. Julius fell to the ground. Julius let out a miserable shriek. Before he could regain his senses, he felt a foot stepping on his chest. This series of movements was as smooth as flowing water. It dazzled everyone. To be exact, all anyone saw was a blur. Then it was over. When everyone on the scene realized what was happening, they found that Mark's foot had already stepped heavily on Julius's chest. Julius was lying on the ground gasping for air, and his eyes were filled with fear. Mark's foot that was stepping on Julius's chest was slowly exerting force. "It's easy for me to kill you now," Mark said, and pressed a little harder. Julius's face turned red. He'd always been the one to step on others. He never thought that he would be stepped on by others one day. Mark's foot increased the pressure again, and Julius's face turned purple. "Kid, how dare you?" Carter, Julius's distinguished dinner guest, with a big gold chain and a slightly fat figure standing at the side, couldn't bear to watch any longer. He came to this private room with the intention of watching the show, because he believed that with Julius's strength, he could easily deal with a few young kids. But he never thought that this young man called Mark would be so strong. Even Julius was being stepped on by him, and this young man kept increasing the pressure of his foot. Could it be that he really wanted to take Julius's life? No matter what, Carter was also Julius's friend. He couldn't just watch Julius die under the foot of a young brat, so he took a step forward. But before he could say anything else, Mark suddenly turned his eyes to him and said, "If you take another step forward, I'll immediately send him to meet his maker." Carter was stunned, but Julius's face showed a terrified expression. He turned to Carter with difficulty and choked out, "Carter, help me! Help me! Call Bob Green. Just say that Julius, I'm in trouble." Carter came to a sudden realization. Only now did he remember that Julius was able to reach his current position not only because of his own strength, but also because of the vast and powerful Green family. Carter had no doubt that if he took another step forward, not only would he not be able to save Julius, he would also provoke that Johnson brat into taking Julius's life. So, the best way now was to call the Green family. Without saying another word, Carter took out his phone and walked to the door. Julius lay still under Mark's foot like a dead dog. "Kid, give me 10 minutes. Wait for the people from the Green family to come in 10 minutes. If you still dare to kill me, I, Julius, will respect you," Julius said while breathing heavily. A trace of a cold smile appeared on Mark's face. "Requesting reinforcements, are you? Fine. I would like to see who you can bring over. I'll wait for you for 10 minutes. At the same time, in a room on the second floor of the Green family house, Marcy was gently peeling an orange. After peeling it, she took half of it and handed it to the old man who was sitting in the bed. "Grandpa, let's eat an orange, okay?" Marcy said. Old Red Green, propped up against his pillows, took the orange from his granddaughter. He looked relieved. Besides Marcy, there was also Red Green's second son, Bob. "Father, how do you feel now?" Bob asked. Red chewed on the orange and said,
Much better. No matter what, this old life was saved. It was all thanks to that miracle worker Marcy invited over.
Red looked at his granddaughter.
Marcy, that specialist you invited, did he really use rebirth acupuncture to save me?
Marcy nodded and said very seriously, Yes, Grandpa, it was indeed rebirth acupuncture. Red's face became serious.
The rebirth acupuncture was created by top certified acupuncture therapists a long time ago. Only a handful of people ever knew it, and it has been lost for many years. I never expected that there would be someone in this world who would use rebirth acupuncture on me. He is truly a rare expert. Marcy, this person saved my life. You must thank him properly for me.
Marcy said, Don't worry, Grandfather. Uncle Bob has already given him $500 million, and I've asked the Super American Bank to send him a sports car. Red Green shook his head and said,
That's not enough. Money is an external object. A genius like him might not care about money. No matter how you look at it, such a man is worthy of befriending the Green family. Marcy, I want you to invite him over so I can personally express my gratitude to him.
After Red said this, he suddenly coughed violently. Marcy hurriedly stood up and used her fist to lightly hit the old man's back.
No problem, no problem.
The old man stopped coughing and waved his hand, saying,
Although my life was saved, I'm still old and weak. I don't think I've many years left to live.
Marcy said, Grandfather, don't talk nonsense. You're going to fully recover and live for many more years. Oh, right, Grandpa, that Mark Johnson told me before he left that he can make some medicine to strengthen your body and help you recover. Red Green's interest was immediately piqued when he heard that.
Really? He even knows how to make the medicine I need? That's fantastic.
Marcy said, I'm not clear about it, but from his tone, it seems that he's very confident. It does not seem like he's exaggerating his skills. Grandfather, rest assured I'll invite him here in 2 days. Then you can ask him yourself. The old man nodded and said,
I really want to meet this young friend of yours. Find a time to invite him over. With his excellent medical skills, he's worth having as a friend.
Bob, who was standing at the side, didn't think it was important.
Father, although that kid used the rebirth acupuncture to save your life, it doesn't mean that he's got excellent medical skills. Don't think too highly of him.
Just as Bob finished speaking, his phone suddenly rang.
Father, I need to take a call.
Bob got up and walked out of the bedroom. A few minutes later, he finished and returned to the old man's bedroom. He said to Red and Marcy,
Father, something seems to have happened to Julius. I'll go and take a look. Marcy, take good care of your grandfather.
Marcy found that there was something wrong with Uncle Bob's face, so she asked, Uncle Bob, what happened?
Bob said, Julius seems to have been stepped on by someone. He's at Pacific Coast Karaoke.
Hey? Marcy's face immediately showed surprise. Julius was stepped on? That can't be right. He's the one who steps on others. How could someone step on him? Especially in his own place? Marcy felt surprised and curious. She added, Who is so awesome that they dare to step on Julius? I can't believe it. Bob said,
It seems to be a kid called Johnson. By the way, his first name is Mark.
Johnson? Marcy stood up immediately when she heard this name. Mark Johnson? Bob said,
I think that's what I hear. Anyway, Julius is in a bad situation now. If If I don't hurry, I think his life will be in danger. All right, Marcy, take good care of your grandfather. I'll be back soon.
Wait, Uncle Bob. Marcy stopped Bob. She walked over and said, Uncle Bob, this Mark you're talking about can't be the Mark who treated Grandpa 2 days ago, right?
Bob said, it's probably just a coincidence. Besides, that guy only knew how to treat illnesses. How could he step on Julius?
Marcy nodded. Good point. But I think the man who treated Grandpa is not an ordinary person. How about this? Uncle Bob, why don't you let me go there and deal with this situation? If the guy who's stepping on Julius is really the same Mark who treated Grandpa, I know him well. It's easy for me to talk to him. If it isn't that Mark, I'll help Julius's men throw him out.
Bob thought for a while and said, that's true. Julius is only a minion of the Green family. There's no need for me to step in personally. Bob was quite relieved at not having to go out. He had every confidence in his niece's ability to handle the situation. He nodded. Yes, Marcy, you go to Pacific Coast Karaoke and sort it out.